I got a coffee, which is surprisingly working way better than an Adderall would. The anxiety brought on by having caffeine intake is actually pretty good for live streaming, which is fun. Just the idea of like having that extra boost that I normally wouldn't have, because Adderall just kind of makes me calmer. Though if I drink too much caffeine, it would probably do the same thing eventually of making me sleepy and calm and just kind of relaxed. I've been actually hoping to do with a friend who does a lot of like research into mental health stuff, a video going over the different different ADHD medication and different types of medication for like different purposes, but mostly ADHD medication, and being like, all right, these are all the these are realistically all the ups and downs you could have of ADHD medication, because a lot of psychiatrists, especially in the US, don't really do their due diligence when it comes to prescribing medication. So having like a little bit of an online guide just to give you more information about these different kinds of medications would be incredibly useful to have around, I believe. We're probably gonna do it in like the framing of like a video game. Currently thinking of doing Fallen from Your Turn to Die, or something like that. Some video game doctor that is gonna like lightheartedly take you through. These are different ADHD medications that exist. These are, how they, work in the body. Yeah, basically a tier list of ADHD medications. That's what we're hoping and planning to do. There's like one hair that's bugging me. Different medications react in different ways to different people, but there are ones that are like kind of a first line of defense, if that makes sense, that if you're diagnosed with ADHD, you can go through this. And there's also ADHD medications that you don't have to be diagnosed with ADHD for. Adderall, which is what I'm on, basically requires an ADHD diagnosis, which for some people can be incredibly expensive. I went through an online service that gave me an official enough diagnosis for about $200-300, but it's still $200-300, which can be pretty rough for a lot of people. If you're a psychiatrist, can't give you an ADHD diagnosis because that requires psychotherapy testing. They can give you, I think, Strattera. I think Concerta is another one of those, and also there was one more, Wellbutrin. I've been on Wellbutrin myself, actually, which are all ADHD medications that do not require an official ADHD diagnosis, but just that the psychiatrist thinks you have ADHD, because these are medications that are not stimulants. They typically work in different fashions than typical ADHD stimulants, which is super helpful to have, as well as the first line of defense if you cannot, at the moment, get an ADHD diagnosis. But caveat, what ends up happening is you end up with like scenarios where I was on Wellbutrin for about like 5 to 6 weeks, but over time, specifically while I was like hanging out at a friend's place for a while, for like a week or two, it just slowly started losing effectiveness, or basically all effectiveness, because Wellbutrin also redistributes dopamine within your brain. What it also did was it started making me more anxious, depressed, and tired than I realistically should have been with the other medications I was on. So I stopped Wellbutrin and really tried to seek out an ADHD diagnosis so I could get on a stimulant, which I knew would most likely be the best thing for me. And there's also like the other medications I'm on. I am on I'm on an atypical antipsychotic, as well as like depression medication. What happens for a lot of neurodivergent people is that, especially like I'm one of the people who are neurodivergent and have a pretty high sensitivity to medication, meaning for pretty much all the meds I take a pretty low amount of the specific medication, which means I kind of have to like, mix and match, as well as balance different levels of different medications for different purposes, because I'm like basically on the lowest or second lowest dosage of every single medication I take, which has worked really well for me. But that's, obviously not the case for everyone, which is, why I'm on like a bunch of different medications. Yeah, I'm like 99% sure I'm autistic, but also I have been diagnosed with ADHD, so I'm not really pursuing an official autism diagnosis, mostly because the problem's getting diagnosed. I kind of read that badly, but I'm probably going to repeat some of that when I'm going to talk about this, which is that there is a pretty significant overlap between a lot of ADHD symptoms being on the spectrum, which is why both are like very much the big keystones of like neurodiversity, and there's just enough overlap that like if you're diagnosed with ADHD, you can get the accommodations you need, you can get the medications you need, to, treat it and to, unfortunately, it's better functioning under capitalism. That's really the goal of treating specifically these conditions. They're not illnesses, they're not disabilities, they're only disabilities because society makes them a disability. You end up having a situation where they just have a lot of overlap. If you have a diagnosis where you're on the spectrum, it might be worth pursuing an ADHD diagnosis if you think you also have ADHD. But, if you're just looking for, say, using disability within the a workplace or within the schooling system, a spectrum diagnosis is going to be similar enough to an ADHD diagnosis. Very much a proponent of broadening up the spectrum of neurodiversity. A lot of people consider neurodiversity to just be autism and ADHD, but I also extend it to other forms of either disability or mental health conditions that essentially make you think in ways that are, neurodivergent, that diverge from what is incredibly typical in society. So, I have borderline personality disorder, and that is something I consider to be neurodivergent, although there is a chance I have a co-condition with either being on the spectrum or, as has been confirmed, ADHD. I say co-condition, the technical term is comorbidity, but I absolutely hate the term comorbidity. There is a lot of terming in this field of psychology that I like to change up. Comorbidity just sounds bad. Mental illness sounds bad. The Ultimate Tay says, yeah, comorbidity is a bit bleak. It is an incredibly bleak term. It's still, for example, the field of psychology that deals with mental health conditions is called clinical psychology is the current term, but a lot of people still call it, and it used to be called it was a really messed up and gross term. It was something like abnormal psychology. That was the one. It's just a really messed up term for telling people you are abnormal, especially when it is, there's various conditions under that term of abnormal psychology that are just forms of neurodiversity, or there is no such thing, in my opinion, as a mental health disorder. There are disabilities that can be treated, and there are disabilities because society makes them disability, and all these other things that I touched on a little bit ago.